Hey everyone, it's Mary McDonnell. I am here with my wonderful producer, Mina Sharp. We are Lady Bam, and we have a very special guest today. Lisa McNulty. She is the producing artistic director for the WP Theater. The WP Theater is the new way of saying the Women's Project Theater, which many of you know about, given my history with the late, great Julia Miles, who founded the Women's Project Theater decades ago. Lisa and I recently met and connected, unfortunately, through the passing of Julia Miles, who mentored me and apparently mentored Lisa and mentored hundreds and hundreds of important futures and careers and artistic leanings throughout her life. So Lisa and I met through the passing of Julia, and I just became so fascinated by her, I wanted you all to know. Lisa is an award-winning Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theater producer. She's in her 6th season as producing artistic director of WP. She came to WP from Manhattan Theater Club. She's worked with the greatest writers, directors, actors, and she has ideas that are so beautifully progressive and energized. And I found her in this interview full of joy. She has a beautiful wife. They are very involved in the world. And I welcome you to the world of Lisa McNulty. Here we go. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. How are you and Joanna? Are you well?
We're good. She's an editor at The Guardian, so she
I
has
know.
turned our living room into the Guardian newsroom. She's out, like she's doing some sort of weird split shift today because one of the editors is having an issue. That's the only reason I'm in the middle of the living room, because otherwise, like, the CNN's on and it's just crazy. But we're fine. I mean, we're healthy and we're both working. We both feel really lucky. I mean, I just feel like
Yeah.
so many folks are in our industry are not working.
Oh,
So.
it's crazy. So, continuing what we were just talking about, which is how you and Joanna are doing, how you're managing your very, very big lives from your apartment in New York, and the kind of amazing cultural input that must be coming into your home on a daily basis. Does it feel extremely different from when you're at the office and she's out and about? Is it overwhelming? What's it feel like?
Well, I have to say it's kind of cool because I get to see what her job is like.
Yeah.
You know, I hear about it and I understand what an editor does, but to actually, because she has a morning meeting with the full team and then a morning meeting with the editorial staff, and I hear that happening. So you sort of hear how the news sausage gets made.
Yeah.
So I think that's very cool. But, like, in a New York City apartment, two people trying to do a job, it's at the same time, it's a little bit bananas. But I feel, like I said, I feel super lucky to be working, and that we're able to keep our theater going. Right now,
Yeah.
theater industry is in such a crazy time because we have no idea when we're going to be able to be opening the theaters again, when people are going to have an appetite to gather together in a space, and what that will
Yeah.
look like, and
Yes.
how we can
Yeah.
prepare. I think obviously I've made my life in the theater. I feel like there is such a power to actually gathering in a room and experiencing something together that will happen in that way only once. Obviously, like, I've dedicated my life to that. So I have hope that that power will draw people back into spaces, but what that'll look like, I think we're still figuring out.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Do you mind sharing with our listeners how that transition was for you in March when things started to shut down? Do you mind telling your story?
Sure.
You and the WP.
Yeah, it was a crazy week. I went from what felt like one of the best days of my career to one of the hardest.
How do you
On
mean? Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Tuesday, the Tuesday of that week, I guess that must have been March 10th.
Yep.
Disney has been hosting a Women's Day on Broadway, or Women of Broadway, with panels and speakers. And so I had been part of it the year before, but this year I was in a much larger panel, and it was great, and it went really well. And then immediately after our panel, Hillary Clinton did the keynote, and we got to meet her, and it was this extraordinary day.
Oh my God! Yeah.
We had this great panel. My laughs landed. It's like.
I do know.
Yeah. And it was at the New Amsterdam Theater. So it was this huge room full of people who had come together to talk about women's voices and women's voices on stage. And obviously that's the thing that matters most to me in the world. And so it was just this extraordinary career high. I looked
Wow.
in a pantsuit. It was all good. So, and then that Thursday, I had planned a trip to Minneapolis to see something and to visit a couple of other theaters and scout work a little bit. And I don't know, I decided to keep the trip on the books. And while I was at the airport, the Broadway League decided to close Broadway. And we knew that we were going to close if Broadway closed. And so that happened seconds before I got on the plane. And
oh my goodness sakes.
Yeah. And so I got on the plane and the doors closed, and I just thought, oh, Lisa, you should not be on this plane. The second I got on the plane, I knew it was a mistake. And so I just decided on the plane, the second I get off, I'm going to see if the fastest flight I can get to come back. And so I sat and I had a mask because it was already.
Yeah, I know. I flew right around then as well with a mask. Yeah.
So I had a mask. I didn't eat anything. I didn't drink anything. I was like, I am not touching anything. So the second I got off the plane, I got booked for a flight to come back. I think it was like an hour and a half later. And while I was squatting in the Minneapolis airport, I was like writing the letter that we would send to our entire mailing list that this stuff was closing. We had our first 2 rehearsals for our 5 plays and 5-week-long festival. We had to communicate with our artists. I had to write a letter to everybody in our artistic community and our community period. I think it was like a list of 50,000 people saying this thing isn't happening. I'm squatting in the airport as my plane is boarding, and did all of that, and then hopped back on the plane and got home at 10 o'clock that night.
Goodness sakes.
And I burst into tears the second I walked into the
apartment. Of course you did.
Yeah, because it's just a lot to take in. And the next day we did a big Zoom meeting with the artists of our lab, and that was really hard. I've never, and I'll knock wood because I hope I never have to do it again, I've never had to actually cancel something. And just this is this lab and this festival.
Is it the Pipeline Festival?
Yeah. We have this 2-year residency for early career writers, directors, and producers. And so we do this festival where it's the culmination of their 2 years. It's how we sort of launch them into the field, into the industry. It's a big deal. Plays go on from our festival to Lincoln Center and all these, sort of film and television, all this fancy stuff. And so it's a big moment. And so I had to sit down with all of those artists and, I was going to say look them in the face, but look them in the Zoom. And it wasn't happening. And it was really hard. But we were able to transition it to what we were calling Pipeline Online, so that
good. That's what I was going to say. What are you doing with it? Right.
Well, because I realized that the most essential piece of it was that we wanted industry leaders, artistic directors, folks, agents, all those folks to get to know the work. And so we asked the folks to think about how they could showcase that work across our social media platforms and email and stuff. So they did all kinds of cool stuff. There were readings of excerpts of the play, there was sharing of design stuff. The folks from the last week's play, they did something very cool. They were doing a play that was about a cross-country road trip that was sponsored by a moonshine brand, right? So the idea of sponsored content, they made like these fake Instagram handles, and they really created.
Oh, that's lovely.
As though the whole thing was really this fiction of a play that was existing online. It was very cool. So, it sort of gave me such hope about what happens when creative people are given a challenge. So that's very cool.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, when you were in the airports, on that day. How were people? Were people understanding around you what was happening? But did you feel like you knew more because of the position you were in and the people you were flying with, and they really didn't? They thought they were just sort of continuing their day. What did it feel like?
That's exactly right. I felt like Chicken Little, I my like mask and, and my, and my look of panic in my eyes. Certainly in New York, I felt like people were a little more aware, but only a little. I mean, I was right next to people with a newborn who are about to get on a plane, and I just, like, my heart was palpitating for these people who are bringing a newborn onto a plane at this moment. But then certainly when I got to Minneapolis, it was like nothing was happening. And again, people were looking at me like a crazy person because I had this mask on my face. And, of course, we've learned now that, like, at the end of the day, it was better for them if I had a mask on my face because I had just come from New York. But it was weird. It was surreal to show up in a place that was in such a different reality than the one that I was in.
Yes.
Certainly because all of Broadway had decided to close, which, is just not a thing that happens. As you say, it's like I was getting a deeper understanding because of the gravity of the choices being made around me. I mean, you said that you flew around then. How did you feel about it?
Well, I flew to Philadelphia from Los Angeles for one of my siblings' 70th surprise birthdays. So there were 30 of us, our clan, we gathered. We flew in, and I had, because I fly a lot and because I commute a lot and because I spent years going back and forth to Vancouver shooting a show, and I was doing that during SARS, I'm very aware of the global mask wearing idea. And so when I started to hear about China, et cetera, and I knew I was flying, I thought, well, I'm just going to grab a mask because I live in LA where we need masks for fires. And I mean, we've got masks in our drawers. I was taking out N95s and calling my friend at infectious diseases at UCLA going, where should I drop off my fire masks? Because we've got them, we're always throwing a mask. So I brought them with me. And this was so extraordinary. I sat down and I brought my wipes. I wiped down my trays and my seats and my screen.
Yeah.
And I started to read, and I saw out of the corner of my eye, my neighbor sit down across from me. And I looked up, and it was this beautiful, elderly Chinese couple, masked. And we just kind of looked at each other, and there was just this incredible, like, we're the only ones with masks. And there was just this, like, that I know that you know that we know that. It was just this beautiful connection. And I thought about them almost every day since. Like, who were they? Where were they coming from? Where were they going? What was their reality? What did they feel? I wished I'd known more, because we just went like this because of the masks.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? And then, we were in Philly. Of course, nothing was, and then we just flew home. And in retrospect, we were 30 of us at a casino in Philadelphia, or mid-February. And I'm sort of like, whoa, I'm glad we're okay. Anyway, so that was my experience. And then I got home, and I was packing to head to Canada to start 2 jobs in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen, of course. Yeah. And I was glad, actually, I felt relieved or grateful that I didn't go and get quarantined there and then have to go through that to come home. So I felt lucky that I hadn't already left for that job. But yeah.
I was so glad that at the time I just thought, oh, am I being crazy for, flying someplace and turning around and flying right back. But I was so glad that I did, because of course then after that, things really just started to, it was like a domino effect. And so I was just really glad to be dealing with that from home.
Yeah. Do you always follow your instincts like that?
I try to. I just think, you got to listen to your gut. What else do you have?
Nothing. Yeah, I agree with you. And oftentimes, don't you get, I know with me that oftentimes when my gut is telling me to do something, it's always accompanied by the spoiler voice that says, "You are crazy. People are going to think you're a wild woman. What are you thinking?" You know what I mean? And as soon as I hear her judging me,
Yeah.
I go, I got to do what my gut's telling me because she's there trying to stop me.
Yeah,
Right?
that's right. That's right.
I want to talk a little bit about, a lot of our listeners will be new to you. We're gathering this group of this community, and so many people from this Lady Bam that started off as a, well, first it started, what would Laura Roslin do? Then it was, what was Sharon Rader doing? It morphed into Lady Bam. And so when I did Gloria Life in Princeton, and when I did the Cherry Orchard a few years before, many of our listeners are starting to be much more aware of the New York theater, and are being so deeply inspired by all of you and the women in the theater in our country, because they're very international. So I want them to know you a little more, because they will fall in love with you for sure. Tell me a little bit about your evolution as an artist. Where'd you grow up? When did you realize you were an artist?
Well, first of all, thanks for being such an evangelist for theater and New York theater. We're very grateful. We all do it for love, so I'm grateful not only that you evangelize for it, but that you continue to do it. You know, I grew up in a really working class household. I didn't grow up going to the theater. I did a summer theater program when I was a junior in high school, and I just caught the bug. It was very cool. And
what do you think the bug was? Like, describe the bug if you can. What did it feel like?
I think it was about the way in theater, because I'd always read books. I was always a reader growing up. I loved stories, but the way that stories come so vividly and immediately to life in theater, that there's the alchemy of it happening in the room. There's just nothing like it. So, and at that time, all you know is what you can see, and all you can see are, and what you see are actors. And so that's what I did to start. But You're Welcome, the American theater, I realized pretty quickly that wasn't for me. But I think that's a lot of people's first way in, right? Because it's what people see in front of them.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so the other stuff is a little bit more elusive. And actually in college, I was an actor and also a dancer. I was in a dance company, which I loved very much and still love dance so much. And so, you know, I apprenticed at Actors Theater of Louisville, which was so
cool. I love it there. Yeah.
I know, me too. So, but like, again, another place where storytelling and new plays and writers are so important. And so really got to understand that there was this other way of being in the theater, which was around storytelling and, you know, dealing with scripts and texts, and then producing. And so when I left Louisville, I started a small company, a theater company with friends. And we
where did you do that?
Down in Tribeca, in a tiny little theater that's right next door to the Ghostbusters firehouse down.
I know where that is, because I lived in Tribeca. I was an early loft dweller at the very beginning.
Yes.
Oh God, yes.
It was on
I lived in Tribeca when there was only one bar open after 5 o'clock at night.
Walker's?
After the factories closed. Now, I can't remember the name of it. It was so long ago. It was on Reed, Duane and Reed, I think. It was near there. Duane. It was on Duane. Yeah, and everybody went there because there was nowhere else to go yet. I lived in a loft that had 7 toilets in it lined up because it had been an office. And how I can't even tell you. Anyway, I hear you. Go back to you.
Well,
I just got excited about Tribeca.
Tribeca, but like now, of course, because Tribeca has become very fancy, it's now it was turned into a champagne bar called the Bubble Lounge. The old theater.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
I know.
You started doing that there. You started working with more literary.
Yeah.
You became more interested in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I was still acting, but again, really to nobody's benefit. And then,
I'm sure that's not true, but go
no,
ahead.
I guarantee you, I always say, I don't write or direct, and you're welcome. But so I started doing that, and then the people started to get other jobs. One of the people I started the company with now runs Berkeley Rep in California. She's the artistic director there, and folks, there's one person who's a very fancy film producer now, Jeremy Cohen. God love you. He's very fancy and important, but like when the company started to, as they do, these things have a life, and then folks move on. I went for the first time and started to work for Emily Mann.
Is that where you started with them? Yeah,
I did start with Emily and worked with her for a year, and then got my first job in 1997, I think it was, working for Julia, what was then the Women's Project. And so she gave me my first, because I was doing an apprenticeship with Emily for the first time. And so this was my first real paying job in the theater, was from Julia. And
I was going to stop you for a minute, because you like toss these things off, like, oh, and so I had this little theater, and then I went to work with Emily Mann, and then I went to work with Julia. Like that, those are big deal moments, right? Like people don't always get to work with Emily Mann or Julia and do what you've done. So you applied to be an apprentice with Emily? Is that what happened at the beginning, or how did it happen?
Yeah, I the company was disbanding, and I just thought, oh, well, I should go work for somebody who knows what they're doing, because we've just been sort of figuring it out, for ourselves. And so I applied and went to go work with Emily and her literary manager, Janice Perrin, who's one of the best minds in the business, and really learned everything, learned what a real theater looks like. And I actually ended up working with Emily twice. I left and I went to go work for Julia, and then I got another call from Emily's producer, Mara. Oh, you know Mara, I'm sure you.
Yeah, I do.
Isaac. Yeah.
And so I went back and forth a little bit, right? Yeah.
I did. And so I produced for Emily after being Julia's literary manager. And so I always think that's a good sign. If somebody wants you back, you must not be too irritating. And then
and then you went back to Julia.
I did.
So they both wanted you back. Hello.
And so I was there for a minute. I was the associate artistic director at Women's Project for a minute, and then Lynn Meadow at Manhattan Theater Club called, and I was there. I was producing there both on and off Broadway for 8 years, I think. Yeah. So I always say I only worked for female artistic directors, and it wasn't on purpose. It just sort of worked out that way. I feel very fortunate.
Do you think that happened because you have a certain point of view that's important to you? Do you think you just naturally gravitate towards others' point of view, and so you light up in that world? Like if you're interviewing someone, or you're for a job, or you're reaching out to, or someone calls you, why do you think you connected with women artistic directors?
I don't know. It's funny because I feel like I always say I must be terrible at interviewing because I never get jobs I apply, because all of these jobs I've gotten a call, like somebody's picked up the phone, given me a call. And so I think it's really, maybe it's more about reputation, sort of who I am and what matters to me. And I think you sort of put that out in the world and it comes back to you, the kind of artists that you foster and the kind of work that matters to you. So I feel like maybe that's why you sort of put it out in the world.
I want to read something that Emily Mann said about you. Do you mind?
Oh, no. Yes. No, okay. Oh, my God.
Okay. Lisa has an incredibly creative producer's mind. She sees how to set up structures that will bring out the best in artists and staffs. She's a great communicator. She knows how to say thank you to those who give money or support of any kind, and she thinks historically, which I love. She sees WP in its historical context and sees the history of theater itself and how important it is. She is politically and culturally aware, She understands the issues of women, and she goes beyond as a gay woman by understanding the women plus issues and the issues of LGBTQ. And her antennae are really culturally sharp.
Oh, she's going to make me cry.
I know, I loved it. I had just said to her, because I was talking to her last week, we did a thing for McCarter, and we're going to be interviewing her for this. So I said, do you have any thoughts on Lisa? And she goes, oh, yeah, I have a few things. And that's what came.
She's so good.
It's a nice description of you, I think, huh?
It really is. I feel very fortunate. I've had these extraordinary women to show me what it looks like to lead, to show me what it means, what that means in terms of the beautiful stuff, but also the responsibility. It's amazing to watch women wield power in that way. I feel very grateful to have had those examples.
Were you very close, or did you know Win Hanlon well?
I obviously had met him many times, but I would not say that I knew him well. But what an extraordinary figure.
Well, at the beginning of what was then Women's Project, he was just like a delightful presence. Like he'd come down into the basement to see what you gals are up to. You know what I mean? But he was always so lovely, and Julia got such a kick out of him. She would also go, Win, and da, da, da. And he mentored so many people so beautifully, and was such a great acting teacher, apparently. I never took his class. And I'm so touched by the fact that he and Julia left the planet around the same time. I'm so moved by it.
Alongside Irene Fornes, who passed like less than a year. Yeah. So it's just sort of a generation of revolutionaries in the theater are leaving us now. Terrence McNally, who also passed,
Exactly.
a little bit ago. Yeah, where it's like that generation of, folks who are really deciding the theater should look differently. And it felt sort of crazy to have all of that happening in the middle of all of this, because I feel like we really haven't had a chance to collectively, I was going to say mourn, but what I really mean is celebrate those lives and celebrate that time. I really look forward to a time when we can gather again so that we can do that.
I know, I understand. I think that there is something I'm noticing in talking to people, because there's this overlay of grief about something we don't even understand yet, but we are overwhelmed in very strange moments with this just generalized grief. And inside of that, though, whether through the pandemic or just through the life process, we're losing people and things are continuing to happen that would be happening in the normal life cycle. So there's that grief and this grief, and yet there's all of this effort towards connection and recreation simultaneously. And I have this sensation, Lisa, that it's pushing us to work on a sort of all levels at once as opposed to layers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if either of you are having that sensation, but it seems like we are being asked to be doing so much all at once now. Mm-hmm. That, like right now, you created this forum for the pipeline artists, but then what happens after that? And how, at the same time, you're thinking about then how do I transition us back into live theater, and how are my colleagues going to do that? Are you having conversations with other artistic directors or producers, or do you know where the theater stands at the moment in terms of how it sees what might happen?
I mean, it's hard to sort of, I think we all feel so fractured. It's hard to say that, for us to speak as this monolith. I do, I gather a group of artistic directors. We get together once a month for breakfast. So I've been trying to continue to gather folks virtually, since we can't gather in real life. So we got together about a week ago, and actually I have my next one tomorrow morning. Mm-hmm. I think the big question is, I think what a lot of us are thinking about is there's this big rush to get a lot of content out online, or to have, putting out videos of old taped productions, or to put readings online. And, I think also, though, at the same time, a lot of us are thinking, is just putting theater on stage actually what we should be doing right now, or should be thinking about like other forms or ways of making that can actually capture something that's special about theater in a different way, rather than just, I mean, I don't think any of us think that like a filmed stage production is actually in any way as powerful. So, or reading on Zoom, I mean, people have been doing very creative things, and I don't mean to undermine any of that, but like, what can we do that feels, if there's a creative moment, how do we be creative in response? And also, how do we be thoughtful so it doesn't continue to be this like fire hose of content? And how do we be more considered and thoughtful about how to curate more carefully? So,
Lisa, that's spot on, because I will just say that from my own experience as a human who has a lot of input because of who I am and what I do. On the one hand, I'm just so excited and grateful to be on Zoom so often and to get to be and feel and drink and whatever it is, right? Talk. But there's a part of me that I feel myself departing from my quieter inner self, which is where anything that's good about me has ever come from, come from the quieter inner self. And I'm finding it very difficult to find her, to find that really creative part of me that I'm not in control of, that produces the best, that I'm capable of serving. I can't get to her. And I'm wondering if you feel that at all.
Well, I want this to be a reflective time. It's interesting because I've been talking a lot to our writers, as you can imagine.
Yeah. How are they doing?
Oh, God, they're feeling so, I mean, they're like, I feel this pressure to be productive, to be responding to this situation, and to be putting out. And they were like, I just don't have it right now. I just want to sit with these feelings and see, maybe something will come later. But this sort of tyranny of need to produce just feels like folks aren't feeling it, and I also want to respect that for people. But personally, I'm wanting, obviously sort of churning a little bit, trying to keep a small not-for-profit alive, but also trying to think about what that means creatively, and how do we be authentic to our artists. And certainly I feel a real responsibility to get money to artists, right? To be paying artists, to be getting money to the community who is like immediately suddenly had all of the work that they had lined up for the year evaporate. So, the idea that we could just like put our heads under and be turtles until this all comes out feels irresponsible to me. And yet, I have this desire to look inward about why we do what we do and how to be, as I said, authentic to that right now as well. And so I feel those those multiple competing impulses. How do I get money to artists? How do I keep this 42-year-old not-for-profit alive that matters in the field? And yet, how do we take in this current moment and think about how to, when it is time to put something out into the world, what does that look like?
Yeah. It's very interesting to me to think about your position. How do you get money to artists? How do you do that right now? I mean, what is the process? How do you stay responsible to that when the structures are just seem to be collapsing? What do you do?
Well, I'm, not to pat myself on the back.
That's okay. You can. We're doing, like that here.
We're really just doing our best, but we canceled the festival, but we did pay our artists, which I feel very proud of. I feel proud of, and I think, I'm thinking a lot about, if we can't produce until, say, let me pull something out of the air, if we can't produce in a theater until January, well, what does that mean? Like, what are we doing between now and then? Are we doing some commissioning? Are we doing developing of new work? Are we finding ways to be employing folks, even if that employment isn't a 8 or 13-week run of a show? Is it, a workshop of a new thing? Is it like a commission to a writer? What is that? And just trying to, is this is a podcast. What is theater and podcast? Like, just trying to be thoughtful. And also, again, like, we don't exist to pay me. We exist to pay them.
Beautiful.
So
Yes,
just trying.
that's an unusual statement. How lovely. No, I love that. We don't
I know something I've been struggling with, and I think, Lisa, maybe you're dealing with the same thing, is as we see so many things transition to online, we're getting these tape theater shows, we're getting all these things. And I do have this concern of, it's great for now, but are we ready? Do we want it to transition there full time? I just feel like the more some of this stuff pushes online, is it going to be more dangerous later that it's not going to exist in the way it used to? And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but it's a concern. We want to be able to gather again in the future as soon as it's safe. How do we have content for now and preserve that instinct to go back to it later?
I mean, I know why you're thinking that. I mean, it wakes me up at 3 a.m. But there's part of me that has to hope, and maybe it's just because I feel that way. I feel a hunger to experience something with other people again. I feel that hunger, and I have to hope that if we're starved of it for a while, it will whet our appetite for it again. We're all going to have to be real conscious of how to be responsible as people who are the keepers of gathering places. Like, what does that look like, and what does that look like in a way that when it is time, people can feel good and safe gathering in those spaces. I was having a conversation with the staff today just about starting to think about what those models look like. But I guess I just feel like we have been gathering with other people to hear stories for a very long time, for thousands of years. And so there's part of me that feels like that's in us, in us really deeply. And so if that's the case, that when it's safe, that there'll be space for that in our lives, it will make space for it. Yeah. But who knows, and I absolutely hear you about that thing. If we're filling that need in other ways and thinking about making content in other ways, will people feel like, well, then why do I have to get on the subway and, get on the subway and go to this really inconvenient part of town? Although my theater's very conveniently located, but, go to an inconvenient part of town and get home late, and gosh, that's a pain in the butt. I mean, sure, I think we're all thinking about that and trying to make our work so enticing that it'll bust through it all.
Absolutely.
Do you ever think about, Mina and I've gone all over the world doing conventions, and it's just an extraordinary situation. So the idea of how that reforms itself is truly overwhelming, right?
It's beyond, but
it's beyond, right. But when you think, Lisa, about the structure of a theater audience as we reemerge, are you all even thinking about socially distanced structures, like people not sitting next to each other? I mean, just that sort of basic idea?
Oh, sure. Literally 2 hours ago, we were having a conversation about that. Are we taking temperatures on the way in? Is it at half capacity, 30% capacity? Are programs just online, so we're not handing anything to anyone? How are we getting rid of concessions in the lobby? Are people just going to sit at their seats? You know what I mean? Like, is the taste in which we might model what socially distant gathering looks like? And I can't think of a sort of more oxymoronic phrase, but yeah, we really are.
That's marvelous. And I suppose you would have to think about the actors blocking changing.
Yeah.
Because you can't really feel confident in the audience. I know that right now, when I binge at night, I'm pointing to my television in case you can't tell. And when we end our day here of communicating, and then we eat, and then we, have wine and we binge on television, more and more, I'm getting more and more anxious with the scenes with people embracing each other. God forbid they're having sex. Or I'm like, oh my God.
I know.
I literally, my energy goes, no, just. And so I was thinking of applying that to, oh my God, I can't wait to go see a play. And will I be sitting like 6 or more feet away from people. But what happens if the actors come together? Will I feel anxious?
I know. I think about that too. And, and dressing rooms and everything, and
Green room.
oh, and you've worked in theaters in New York. They're old and they're terrible. And the backstage areas, the like hallways are tiny. It's just not well suited to that because all of the buildings are ancient. So I know we're really having to think about what that looks like. And I think that reality, we're going to be looking at that for a couple of years, it seems to me.
For sure.
Like what, like that new reality, even just that thing you talked about, because I feel it absolutely. Like, how long is it going to take for us to feel comfortable watching two people touch?
I mean, it's just a profound idea of, I guess it's kind of like, what will be the quality of our post-traumatic syndrome, right? Post-COVID will be the anxiety we feel in intimacy, just someone reaching out. Or someone was telling me the other day, who was it? Oh, Nina, I know who it was. It was Paula at McCarter. Her wife was telling us before I was doing a thing with Emily at McCarter, and Paula's wife came on to say hi, and she was telling us that this child ran up to her on the street and just wanted to hug her, and she felt and then coming home and resolving that feeling, that suddenly the idea of a child coming up to you for a moment of intimacy innocently, you fear for the child and you fear for yourself, and it suddenly changed that equation, and there's such a sadness in that. And how do we recover our feelings about public displays of intimacy with strangers? I have been for years smiling at every person I see in a grocery store and stuff, because I don't know, I was having a really hard holiday a few years ago, and I just said, I got to turn this around, and I just went out and I wished everybody, like we were in Germany, hi, how are you? And just to death. And now I'm out there in my mask and I keep smiling at people under my mask, but they can't tell I'm smiling. And I can't tell if they're scowling at me, or if everyone's suddenly mean, or if we're all really vulnerable underneath our mask. I mean, what do we do?
I've been practicing. A friend of mine, Cara, is an artist, and she posted on social media, I thought was the best idea. She was like making smiley eyes and waving, so that like you could see smiley eyes and a wave, a friendly wave, and so suddenly it was like communicating, I'm not mad at you, I'm a smiley nice person.
That's a great idea. I actually thought about drawing it. I've got some white cloth masks, and I thought about drawing a smile, or to just write the words, I'm actually smiling underneath this, and to see if I wore it out there, same idea, if I would elicit a different response, because it's just a frightening experience to go outside. But we will get better at it, I'm sure. You know what I wanted to ask you, Lisa, and you're giving us so much time, I appreciate it, but I'm not done if you can hang in here. I would love to hear you talk about, because I'm fascinated by how this occurred in the culture and where we are. You transitioned talking about the Women's Project, renamed it WP, and it became a center for female identified artists, as opposed to women writers or women, right? And I want you to talk about that expansion, if we may, because I know that we have gone through that culturally, and yet we've just had this recent wave of Me Too and Time's Up that was brought women, so not solely, but primarily back into focus in terms of where we've got to push. Just can you talk a little bit about your expansion of that idea and why you chose to rename the theater? And just please, and then I have more.
Interesting, because Julia actually wanted to do that, because of course Women's Project was because it was a sub-project of the American Place Theater, so it was Women's Project, and Julia talked about it and just never quite, she was a little nervous to make the big change, and so it was of course easier for somebody like me to come along, and at a time of transition, that's always a time to make a big change. And I had been a producer at Manhattan Theater Club for 8 years, and everybody calls that MTC. And it seems like kind of professionalizing, like it's just like it's casual and professional and a way of thinking about a theater. And I felt like a thing that had plagued Women's Project, and I don't know if you feel this way, somebody who has been such an important part of the place for such a long time, but I think that I certainly feel that people bring the bias they bring to women to a women's organization, right? So they presume that the work isn't as good, or it's a little, it's a little dutiful. You go to help somebody, you don't go because the work is so great. So, it's like, am I doing my charity work today? And instead I felt like, if I had just come from one of the biggest theaters in the city and had been producing on Broadway as well as off Broadway, it taught me some things about what communicates quality and what communicates worthiness. Like, you are worth something, you have worth, you have value. And I felt like that kind of, I hate the notion about branding and your brand and stuff, and yet.
But it's the reality.
Yeah. And yet the notion of perception and how an institution like this that is devalued just because of what we do, how we could fight against that intentionally. And so that was really about what the sort of name change was about. It was about, here's a thing that maybe feels a little bit more current, a little bit more professional, and people tend to, want to diminish us. Let's elevate. And so that was what that was about. But in terms of being more inclusive, it's interesting because our expanded understanding of gender, that wasn't something that was part of Julia's reality, right?
For sure.
And so I felt like I was inheriting not Julia's institution. I am inheriting Julia's institution, obviously, but like I am representing a population that has grown and changed since 1978. And so if Julia's impulse was to support artists who are being marginalized because of their gender, which I think is the soul of what she was trying to do, now we understand gender differently, and I needed to be responsive to that change. And I always felt like Julia was trying to make a big tent. Julia was like racially intersectional in a deep way. I mean, I think that her collaborations with Irene Fornes and Billy Allen were deeply inspirational to me. And I just felt like if she was thinking broadly, she wasn't ever just thinking about women. She was thinking about like all kinds of women. I needed to have as big a tent as Julia did. And I just think culturally that means something new. And so I feel like it's a great opportunity to serve the soul of the mission and to be able to grow as the culture grows. But still, dudes send me plays all the time. So
good.
They really do. Yeah.
Can you state what you feel the soul of the mission?
I think if I were to, I should be able to do this easily. I think the real soul of the thing is we exist to uplift the voices of artists who are marginalized for their gender or gender expression. And we support artists at every point in their career. I think we all know that men become masters and women disappear.
I want you to talk about that. I read a quote. Yeah, we'll go to that. Okay, keep going.
And also just that, anything that we're feeling about women of color experience times many, many numbers exponentially. And so wanting to think about all of the ways in which those kinds of folks experience bias, and with a central organizing pivot around gender and gender expression. Sorry, that's really convoluted, but
it wasn't at all. It was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And I really appreciate that you were willing to try and dig in and actually state it. Because we need you. We need to understand that people who are leaders in this industry, as you are, who understand both the beauty of and the vulnerability of the idea of gender bias as we communicate collectively. That's not going to go away. And that isn't suddenly not going to be an issue ever, right? And coming out of this situation that has made it so clear that there are certain parts of our population who are really at risk in every way. And so when plays start coming through your pipeline that can reflect back on this moment and what we've learned about all of the people who are marginalized economically, socially. So to have a theater where the leader of that theater can state so clearly the kind of moral compass of the endeavor is really just a pleasure. So I'll just say that. And if you'll stay on, I want to read a quote, okay? Because I just got such a kick out of it. Okay, so this was you in some interview, I think in 2017, and you said, I'm trying to figure out how to address in our programming and advocacy that I think male writers get to a certain point and they're received in the community as masters, whereas women disappear. Obviously, there are fewer of them, but there are really, really fine women who would be heralded as masters of the form, and they just disappear. And their work doesn't get done, and they aren't invited to panels where they get to opine. And I find that really frustrating. I absolutely adored that. And I really relate to it because I think as a female artist of a certain age, trying to understand how to recreate and stay brave enough to try to remain relevant in an industry that makes women irrelevant, just sort of either very obviously so on camera, that's the most obvious place we are rendered irrelevant. But when I was listening to you or when I was reading about your thoughts about writers and the idea of how we stop hearing from these masterful women about their process. And so talk about that a little bit. Like,
well, I feel like, I often ask people, I'll say to people, name 3 female playwrights over 60 and you can't say Paula Vogel.
Yeah, although we love to say her, but yeah, you can't say
Paula Vogel. I love Paula Vogel.
I know, me too. Yeah.
But that's the only person people can think of. And that's because folks have gone away. And I think about all of these extraordinary artists, certainly many of them who are part of the inception of Women's Project. I think about Constance Congdon and Claire Chafee and these people who made extraordinary work who just, they're dismissed at a certain point. And it's been a real intention of mine with every season to put very, very early career artists alongside folks who would be considered mid-career or master playwrights. So we were launching, we would do a world premiere, giving somebody their New York premiere. I'm trying to remember who in that season, but it was alongside Teresa Rebeck, who is, on Broadway the next season, or Sarah Poole, who is a sort of one of fancy Broadway and other, extraordinary writer, alongside launching Martina Mayok in that same season, who went on 2 years later to win the Pulitzer. So, it's very intentional to put, I've had somebody over 40 or 50 in every season since I've been here because it's felt meaningful to be putting, because I think it's easy to look at the young, shiny writers, particularly for women who are valued when they are young and cute. And listen, we're all cute.
Yeah.
Look at you, you're amazing. But when women are easy, when they're young and shiny to value, but of course that's diminishing, isn't it? Because once they get their feet under them, they get a kind of agency, they aren't given as much scope or ability to advance. I think that's starting to change, and certainly as we're starting to see, certainly in film and television, with more female showrunners. Sarah Team, who is the showrunner of The Affair, was my intern.
Oh, what a great show.
I know, I love her, and she's extraordinary. But these are the writers who now have shows of their own and are hiring female writers, and they are taking that storytelling forward. But it's still an uphill battle.
It is. Yes.
You know, to be given that kind of mantle. You know, I think about like name 5 male playwrights over 60. We'd be here all day because they just continue to get opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And, you know, I think also that they get more scope to fail. Their play can do okay, or their play can do okay, and they can fail. It's the Peter principle,
They
right?
can fail up.
Fail up. Whereas
Mina, that's one of Mina's favorite things. The way men fail up, you know, white men fail up.
They don't even really have to fail to be considered a failure and not being given the other opportunity. And you also look at how resources are allocated, you know, on stage, but I think also in film and television. Sarah Treem actually is very smart about this. When you start looking at where the money goes, like, you know, there are more women's in seasons now than there were certainly when Julia started. But if you really dig in, you'll look and see it's at this in the smaller space or in a festival, or it's a little more developmental, or, you know, in your industry, it's, you know, it's not getting the big deal, it's getting the smaller deal. And so, you know,
secretly getting the smaller deal.
Yes. And it's insidious, you know, it's just a way of like, who's ready for responsibility, what's commercial. When you actually look at the numbers, when women are creating product, whether it's on stage or on film, it's actually doing very well.
Very well.
It doesn't register as being successful. All the time, women, it doesn't matter, women or men will say, oh, you run a theater that does work by women, can I come? Or women will say, well, my husband like it. And I just think, do you not go to things written by men because you think that you won't like it? It's ridiculous.
That's right.
What is this ridiculous binary? Like, only that stuff made by white men is normal and consumable by all, but everything else is specialty niche products. It's just, it makes no sense to me.
Right. No, exactly. There's a layer of gaslighting that we're all still trying to climb our way out of. And it is in everything, you know, and you almost sometimes don't even get that it's happening because you're so used to it. It's like Gloria Steinem says, the patriarchy is in us. It's not, it's embedded, and we have to pull it out, you know? So when you look at, when you think about, and I'm sure you do, what is happening to us right now and where we were culturally, just in terms of the Me Too movement and things that happened in the couple of years leading into this pandemic. I find it kind of fascinating that, for example, Harvey Weinstein went into jail right before the virus hit, and now he's already out because he had the virus. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder now, and I want to ask you if you have any thoughts on this. Is this going to set us back or move us forward? And my hope is that it's going to move us forward in a way that, because of our feeling of global connectedness, perhaps we're starting to lift out of some of this binary behavior and some of this sort of gaslit nation of it all. But what do you think, Lisa? Do you have any feelings or instinct on it?
You know, I think like most things, there will be some things that get better and some things that, you know, slide backwards, because I think folks get cautious in times of trouble. So chances they were willing to take, what they perceive as a chance, they get more risk averse. And again, I'm going to say risk with air quotes. But other stuff, I think there's some stuff that will move forward. You know, I think that's why I'm pushing so hard to keep our tiny little theater afloat, because I think the places that are advocating for those voices are going to start to matter even more. In times that are risk averse and people are scared and pull up. So I don't know.
I know. The I don't know-ness of it all is such a, it's not a comfortable position for women leaders, is it? Right? I mean, so much of it is to sort of not be okay with the I don't know, but to do something, to create something, to try to solve something, to try to, you know, but we can't. It's uncertain. My son was on our deck yesterday, socially distancing hello to us, and he seemed so marvelously okay in the uncertainty of the just being in the present moment. And I was so pleased that he has that, because boy, I wouldn't have at 25, known how to let it be, for the moment.
Yeah.
Lisa, I just am so thrilled that we've gotten the beginning of getting to know each other through the beautiful and tragic passing of Julia. And it's just happened so organically. Talking to you today and learning about you, getting ready for this, I just feel so hopeful in your presence. I really do.
I so appreciate that, Mary. I feel Julia loved you so much. She used to talk about you all the time.
Oh.
All the time. And she kept a picture of you on her desk, and you loom very large in our history, not only in our history, but as a powerful woman who has made space for herself. So I feel very grateful to, again, also to begin to get to know you. It feels just right. And I'm grateful to you for this time.
Well, we loved it. Mina, is there something you want to say, dear?
No, just thank you so much. Thank you for keeping the arts alive and keeping your artists going. And we all need the arts right now. I think that's become more clear than ever. And so, I look forward to all the theaters coming back to New York and enjoying something at your theater and seeing firsthand what you're creating there, because I really can't wait.
I know.
You come visit us in New York someday.
All right. Yeah, someday we'll come. Bless you. Our love to your beautiful wife, and tell her to stay safe out there.
I definitely will. And you guys too, you hang in there.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Lisa. Bye.